A big chunk of my content is centered on helping indecisive neurotic overthinkers secure clarity of thought and purpose. By nature, this type of person is prone to doubts and second guessing, and they have a hard time maintaining steadfast convictions. Unfortunately, most meaning and purpose generating frameworks out there, such as religions, seem to rely on convictions, or to put it in another way, on faith. So, what do you do in that situation? If you would like to believe in something, but you have a hard time forcing yourself, it doesn't feel genuine, you don't really feel it, and you might be worried about it or feel some sort of shame or deficiency, or that you're lacking something. And one example that comes to mind, and I don't want to misrepresent him, but I know that Alex O'Connor, who is a famous atheist slash agnostic YouTuber, seems to have the way he speaks about it, it seems like he has an ability to believe in God. But it seems from the way he speaks about it that he would like to if he was able to. Now, I'm not sure that's exactly the case, but I'm sure there are some people like that where, they would like to believe in something, at least in some overarching framework, sense of meaning, but they just, don't really feel it. It's not there. It doesn't feel true. So what do you do in that type of situation? Are you screwed? Are you doomed to, nihilism or a life of meaninglessness if you can't muster faith in something? And I don't think so. The philosophy I advocate for, and the meaning slash purpose generating framework that I think is best, is existentialism. And actually, unlike what some people claim or seem to imply, I don't think that existentialism relies on faith, or at least not in the usual way we tend to think about it. It doesn't require you to assent and pledge a conviction into a set of claims, like this is definitely true. Rather, I think it's more based on a rejection of certain framings of life. And it's more of an attitude, a reaction, than a claim or a set of claim with a specific content or proposition that can either be true or false, like God exists, or and these are the attributes of God, or any other type of proposition in that type of like saying this is true, and from this truth I'm deriving my meaning. Instead, it's more an attitude of refusing to give up or settle for some from a meaningless life, we'll say, and certain framings of life and what it means or what it doesn't mean. And I think in this way, it's more you could think more of it as a spite-fueled stance rather than a faith or conviction-driven stance. So if it's not asserting something, and I think that that's kind of the way some people frame existentialism, that it's asserting that you can invent your own meaning, right? That's kind of the general claim of existentialism. But I don't think that's really true. At least that's not the way I conceive of it, and I don't think that's the way a good chunk of existentialists think of it. So if it's a rejection instead of an assertion, what is it rejecting, right? And so I think it's refusing to capitulate to a meaningless or purposeless or unfulfilling life. It's saying no to what I would call life-denying philosophies. And so that would include absurdism, right, which is kind of the, we'll say, the premise of existentialism, this idea that, we're, as human beings, we're looking for meaning and purpose in a reality that doesn't seem to have any, objective meaning or purpose. And so basically it's being unsatisfied with this and, rebelling against it. And as well as most religious dogmas, which I believe fall into that life-denying philosophy, and I'll explain why a little bit later. So basically it's kind of a quest for a better answer than hopelessness, bitterness, and delusion. Whether or not it's ever found, right? It's not saying you'll definitely be able to find it. It's more, I'm not happy with this, I'm not satisfied, I'm rejecting the current state of things, and I'll try to find something else. But it's not saying I definitely know there is something else. Right? So it's more of an act of rebellion against bullshit and arbitrariness. It's saying, if that's the best you got, I don't want it, and I'll keep looking. And this way, it's similar to the zetetic branch of Pyrrhonism. So Pyrrhonism is philosophical skepticism branch of philosophy, right? Which lays several arguments basically that show that basically it's impossible to absolutely justify any claim, and so it seems like we're doomed into skepticism, or at least there's like an inescapable level of uncertainty that's ever present, and I've talked more about it in a specific video I made on it. And so there's like three branches to Pyrrhonism. So there are the effectic branch, which are engaged in suspension of judgment. So the idea of suspension of judgment is because you can't be sure of anything. You don't really believe in anything, or it's like you suspend your judgment. You're like, I'm not sure. Even if you act as if some things are true, you're just like, I never know. So that's kind of a main practice of Pyrrhonism. So that's one of the branches. They just do the suspension of judgment. You've got the aporetic branch, which is more engaged in refutation of claims. And then the last branch is the thetic, and they're engaged in seeking, right? They're searching for the truth, but have thus far been unable to find it. And so they continue to suspend belief while also searching for a reason to cease the suspension of belief. And so for me, existentialism is basically the same idea, but for meaning and purpose. It's like, well, we're continually searching for it because we're not satisfied with the alternatives, but we haven't been able to find it, or at least I think it's more, and I think that's kind of a stance of existentialism. It's that you're unable to find it on an objective level that, will work for everybody, for every single person. It's more, I think you can find something good enough as an individual. And so moving on to kind of fleshing out a little bit more what I mean by life-denying philosophies, and which is what I'd say existentialism is rejecting and rebelling against. So I would describe a life-denying or anti-life philosophy, any kind of theoretical framework or framing of life that is based on a rejection, vilification, or objectification of life. And by objectification of life, I would say it's any basically framing that describes life as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. So, nihilism, I would say, is an anti-life philosophy because it basically says that everything is pointless, including life. And so, that's kind of it's pretty anti-life vision of things, right? Like, what's the point of living? There's no point, everything sucks. Cynicism is kind of a similar framework or way of seeing things, where basically it's kind of a similar take on nihilism, but with like a dark or pessimistic look on everything, where everyone is selfish, evil, and mediocre, and everything sucks. And so again, it's just basically saying that life is not worth living in a certain way, that there's nothing good out of to be gotten out of it, except for perhaps some fleeting pleasures now and then. But I would say also most religions, which all technically give you kind of a kernel of meaning and purpose, are actually anti-life, because the meaning and purpose comes from outside of life, right? So if you take most of the Abrahamic religions, or the many pagan mythologies, they're usually based on a concept of life and then hell and paradise, right? Or basically, it doesn't really matter even if it's called hell and paradise, but once you die, you go in another plane of existence, right? And your life is only here to basically figure out where you'll be filtered, right? It's like this filtering process. It's like, depending on what you did in life, you'll go to one of these buckets. You can go of spiritual afterlife plane. And so basically in that case, life is just a means to an end. It's just there to filter you to the real eternal bucket, or metaphysical plane. And that's where the fun stuff, or even more horrible stuff, happens. But basically life kind of sucks, and it's more about doing what God or the gods expect of you, and then you'll be rewarded or punished. But that's kind of a pretty negative and dismissive view on life, which is just this means this kind of sucks. It's not. It just kind of going through the motions in order to get to the real fun stuff. And then you've got other religions like Buddhism, which are to an extent even even more depressing, I'd say, where the idea is that the life is basically hell. It's like this unending suffering, and you're doomed to keep reincarnating within it. And so even death won't let you escape. And so basically the goal is to like commit the ultimate soul suicide, and obliterate yourself in a way that is so final that you'll never reincarnate again. And so you won't exist, and so you won't have to go through this whole cycle of suffering. So I think that's probably the most anti-life conception out there. And I think that this idea, or part of this viewpoint, was inspired, or it kind of clicked with me when, thanks to Daniel Quinn's work, he talks about most of the, we'll say, prevalent religions out there as salvationist religion, especially in his second book, which if I remember correctly, is called The Story of B. In any case, I would highly recommend you read his Ishmael series. The book I mentioned is the second one, is a series, and you might as well start with the first one called Ishmael. But anyway, he kind of made the point that all of these religions are similar in that they kind of say life sucks. That's kind of the general premise. It's based on the suffering of living, and it's always about telling you a way to escape the suffering, either through like some after eternal promise of there'll be something better, or destroying your soul or something else. And I think there is also the following Dune quote by Frank Herbert is a pretty good expression of this sentiment, and it goes: "Much that was called religion has carried an unconscious attitude of hostility towards life. True religion must teach that life is filled with joys pleasing to the eye of God, that knowledge without action is empty. All men must see that the teaching of religion by rules and rote is largely a hoax. The proper teaching is recognized with ease. You can know it without fail because it awakens within you that sensation, which tells you this is something you've always known." So to go back to this idea of rejecting these anti-life philosophies, and basically this is saying this is not good enough for me, like this is not satisfying. But I'm not giving up. Not only you're refusing those answers that are given to you, but also you're rejecting despair, or giving up. You're like, I'll keep looking even if I never find. And I think it's well captured by the title of one of Viktor Frankl's book, which is Viktor Frankl is a pretty famous existentialist, and the book is called "Yes to Life in Spite of Everything." And so, in this case, yes is kind of as a form of an assertion, but it's in spite of everything that kind of captures this stance of refusing to give up. And in his case, he's a man who kind of can back up this claim with some gravitas, I guess, seeing as he survived Auschwitz. So how can this shift in framing help constant doubters? How is existentialism something that might help where other solutions do not? Well, the thing is, you might not be able to find strengths in assertion, in conviction that are based on saying this is definitely true. This is the reality of life. If that's hard to do for you because you're not sure, maybe you could be wrong, and there's a lot of good arguments both ways. How can you really be sure? Well, maybe you might be able to find more strength in rejection, as well in humility and honesty. But also, there's kind of a shift where a lot of religion are based on making a descriptive or factual claim in which you have conviction, and then from it you derive moral claims, right? So God exists, and God is the source of all moral truth, and I believe in God, and therefore I can get my moral principles, right? But then if you have a hard time naturally with making those strong descriptive claims and believing in them in spite of very little evidence, or then you might have an easier time making a strong moral or normative claim, holding a strong moral conviction that, for if I take my own example, I tend to have a hard time having very strong factual descriptive convictions. Like, this is definitely true. I'm like, I don't know, you're never too sure. But I find it easier to have a strong and resilient moral convictions. So like if I see some instances of injustice, this will feel deeply wrong, and that feeling is this conviction inside me, this moral conviction, stays strong and reliable and steadfast across time. And so I think that instead of trying to base your entire meaning and purpose needs or kind of generating framework on top of descriptive convictions, you might find it easier to do so on the top of a more moral or normative conviction. Basically, that you're not satisfied with these views on life. Like, this is not good enough. This doesn't feel right. And so this moral conviction that this is not good enough and that you'll keep looking and you refuse to give up might be more helpful in helping you withstand the evil and bullshit of life, and inspire you, give you the strength to keep trying and doing your best. And that's why I think that that's one of the strengths of existentialism, and why I get a little bit irked when it's presented as just this assertion that you can invent your own meaning. I don't really think that's what existentialism is about, and I don't really think that's where that's where the true strength of it lies. So if you like this video, if you find it interesting, you might also want to check out the video where I talk about whether existentialism is about inventing or deriving meaning, and kind of also examining so-called objective morality as an alternative. And I've also done videos or like primers on existentialism and Pyrrhonism. So you might want to check them out if you find yourself interested in these topics. Also, don't hesitate to ask questions in the comment. I'd be happy to create videos that answer specific questions, because I'll be sure that it actually helps someone or address a real person's concerns. In any case, thanks for listening. I hope you got something out of this, and see you in the next video.